Israeli policies, particularly in the West Bank, occupied by Israel's military since 1967. So when Jimmy Carter used the term apartheid, and when some other people talk about apartheid, they're limiting their frame of reference to what is happening in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, West Bank also including occupied East Jerusalem. But that's actually not how I'm using the term apartheid. And increasingly, people are talking about apartheid in Israel as a way of looking at what is taking place today in Palestine-Israel as one single territorial unit. In other words, considering Israel's pre-67 territory and the occupied territories as a kind of de facto single state, on the basis that it is Israel which controls that whole area and has done since 1967. And apartheid is suggested as a way of understanding how Israel segregates space, how Israeli policies for exploitation of natural resources, for the control of land, how that breaks down in different ways, affecting Palestinians both who are under military occupation without Israeli citizenship, but also for the Palestinians with Israeli citizenship. Again, that being something I'll expand on later tonight, but I'll touch upon it a bit later in a moment too. So sorry just to take a few minutes explaining what we're not talking about, but hopefully that will preempt maybe some questions or clarify some doubts for people. So just to summarize, number one, we're not saying that what happened in South Africa and is happening in Palestine is exactly the same. And number two, when I use the framework of apartheid, I'm looking at it as a way of understanding Israeli policies as they affect Palestinians both inside the pre-67 lines with Israeli citizenship and also those under military occupation in the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Also, apartheid is not just bad stuff. Okay, some pro-Israel groups try and come back with the apartheid charge by pointing to other incidents or phenomenon of discrimination and human rights abuses in other countries and saying, oh, well, this is apartheid and this is apartheid. Well, the whole point of using apartheid is because there is a grounding for it in international law. Just to give you the 4 reference points that people use, you've got the 1965 International Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, you've got the 1973 Convention on the Suppression and Punishment of Apartheid. It was included as an additional protocol to the Geneva Conventions in '77. And the crime of apartheid is also mentioned in the statutes of the International Criminal Court as well, like most recently. Okay, so there is a kind of legal framework that you can take and apply to a particular situation to say whether this is apartheid. Is it systemic structural racial discrimination based on dividing one group from another? Is it about policies to ensure that one group dominates at the expense of another group? I also just wanted to mention something that's really, I encourage you to look this up on the internet when you get back home, whatever. The UN's body that monitors countries' compliance with the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, CERD or CURD, the committee that monitors that takes each country every year, I mean not each country every year, kind of a cycle process, every few years every country gets a review. And just recently they reviewed Israel and Israel's compliance with that convention. And I really recommend that you look up the UN's committee's findings on Israel's policies, because the UN's findings were pretty damning. The committee's findings were pretty damning. And they actually used the term apartheid in this kind of analysis of Israeli policies, and they kind of warned Israel, the state party. They warned Israel, reminded Israel of the prohibition, the absolute prohibition of the policy and a regime of apartheid. Okay, so that's just another reference point for you to look up as well later. I'm going to give some examples now for what we're talking about when we talk about Israeli apartheid. I've been very impressed by the installations that are around this area here, and if you haven't had a look at them yet, go ahead and take a look and read what's there and see what's going on. They're giving some examples of the kinds of routine injustices that the Palestinians experience day after day. As a way of giving examples about what Israeli apartheid means in practice, I'm going to break it down into geographical area, because it's a useful way of doing it. But remember that in all of these cases, Israel is the controlling power. Israel is the de facto government, if you will, of these areas. So, of course, you have Palestinians who've got Israeli citizenship. 20% of Israel's population, and they're sometimes referred to as, or often referred to in the mainstream at least, as so-called Israeli Arabs or Arab Israelis. And those are the Palestinians who were left behind, who managed to stay inside what became Israel, when most of the Palestinians were ethnically cleansed in 1948 in the Nakba, the catastrophe. But some of the Palestinians managed to stay behind and became Israeli citizens. But just because they have citizenship inside Israel doesn't mean that they're not subject to policies that most of us would recognize as constituting gross discrimination. So just to give you a few examples, there are a number of Palestinian citizens in Israel, tens of thousands, who can't